In this video, we're going to talk about the branches of the abdominal aorta and the veins that would be the counterparts to those structures. When you're looking at the abdominal aorta, the first artery that would be just south of the diaphragm, so the diaphragm would be located in this area. The diaphragm would be located in this area. You have two vessels that are associated with that diaphragm. The first one is the superior phrenic artery. The superior phrenic artery supplies the upper part of the diaphragm muscle with nutrients. And then you've got the inferior phrenic artery, and the inferior phrenic supplies the underside of the diaphragm with nutrients. Now, think about this. The diaphragm is a muscle that is working very hard because it's involved in your breathing. And as a result of this, it's going to need a lot of nutrients to keep doing its job. And because of that, it's going to be working overtime, and this is going to mean it's going to need a lot of blood. Okay. So as we go further down, the next, and I should mention that you have two superior phrenics, a right and a left, and two inferior phrenics, a right and a left. The next structure is what we call unpaired. This means there's only one of them. And this is the celiac trunk. And the celiac trunk has three branches that come off of it. This one is the splenic branch. It goes to the spleen. Part of it will go up to the stomach, but if you just tell me, if I say what are the three branches, if you say the splenic, the hepatic, and the gastric, that's usually enough for me. Now it turns out that the hepatic actually branches into the proper hepatic, which feeds the liver, and there's another branch which goes down to the duodenum, which is sort of the base of the stomach. Now, if you can picture the organs here, gastric, which is going to go to that stomach. Remember, stomach would be like this. The splenic would go to the spleen. And the hepatic, which would go to the liver. Traveling further south, we now have the superior mesenteric artery. And the superior mesenteric artery mainly supplies blood to the northern parts of the intestines. The way that I kind of remember that that's what the superior mesenteric artery does is I kind of look at where it is. So if this is the hepatic branch, here's the celiac trunk, right? Here's the gastric branch of the celiac trunk. So this superior mesenteric is projecting below the stomach. And what I kind of think of is well, what's below the stomach, right? It's the intestines. And what this thing is doing is mainly sending blood to the upper parts of the intestines. So that would be the transverse colon and the upper parts of the small intestine. Next up, we have the renal arteries, and you've got two of them. You've got a right and left renal artery. And if you look very closely at those renal arteries, you can kind of make out that there would be a kidney here and a kidney here. And some of you may wonder where the artery that would feed the adrenal gland would go. Well, the adrenal gland, remember, would be on top of the renal, or on top of the kidney, excuse me, this right here would be the adrenal artery. And it would feed the kidney, or feed the adrenal gland. As we continue on down, we get to our next artery south, which is this one. This is the gonadal artery, and you've got a right and a left because you've got a right and a left gonad. So you've got a right and a left gonadal artery. And you'll notice that they do project down fairly far, but that's because our gonads do start up further in our abdomen, and they drop as we are developing. If you're a boy, they drop a little bit further than if you're a girl. In ladies, these gonadal arteries would go to the ovaries. In gentlemen, these gonadal arteries would go to the testes. Last but not least, we have these arteries, which I don't know, I kind of adore because they stick out. Oh, not last but not least. I guess I've got a couple more to do. We have these arteries. These guys kind of stick out like fingers on the side, but you'll notice that if we had to characterize them, we could characterize them by the part of the spine they're in. And this part of your spine would be known as the lumbar region, and sure enough, these are called the lumbar arteries. These arteries supply the muscles of the low back and the vertebrae with blood. Okay. Next up, we have the inferior mesenteric artery. The inferior mesenteric supplies the lower intestines with blood. Or lower parts of the intestine with blood. And this would be like the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and the parts of the small intestine that are lower in the abdomen. That actually will split between the ileum and the jejunum. You'll learn about these when you learn about digestion. And then you've also got this branch, right here, that looks almost like a tail coming off of that aorta right there. That's the median sacral artery, and the median sacral artery supplies blood to that sacrum, both the bony structures and some of the muscles. One thing I do want you to notice about a lot of the arteries of the abdomen is that their names come from the structures that they serve. So gastric would serve the stomach. Common hepatic and proper hepatic would serve the liver. Now the common hepatic, anytime it's common, you know that it splits. So that one actually splits, and part of the common hepatic is going to feed other structures, and they're not all stomach. It actually splits off. Part of it goes to the liver and part of it's going to go to the stomach. Cystic is a funky one. That's the one you're going to forget. The cystic feeds the gallbladder, and that one comes in right here. And it's kind of a neat one because it comes off of that hepatic circulation. And then you can work out what some of these other ones are. This area in here, in your intestines, there would be an area of tissue that's got a lot of blood flow to it, and it would be a membrane. And more recently we've come up with that it's an organ called the mesentery. So superior mesenteric is going to be the top of that mesentery, and inferior mesenteric would be the bottom of that mesentery. That's why it works out to be the top and bottom of the intestines. Ileocolic, colic means colon. Ileo means the ileum. That's just that part of your intestine that's over in that area. Superior rectal means top of the rectum. That's the top of the rectum right there. Left colic, left of the colon. Right colic, right of the colon. Middle colic, middle colon, see right there. And then sigmoid would hit the sigmoid colon. All right, and in the pelvis, the one that I usually like to talk about here before we go on to the legs is this internal pudendal. And the reason I like to talk about that one is that that's the one that feeds the external genitalia. And if a person is experiencing an issue in blood flow to those genitalia, that can cause some big problems. This one in men, it's going to be a little bit bigger, and it is the artery that's going to be responsible for maintaining an erection. So there you go. All right, now let's talk about the... Okay. Now we need to start working through the veins of the abdomen. And just like we saw with the veins of the thorax, you're going to see a lot of similarities to the arteries. So first off, everything is going to be draining into the inferior vena cava. So the inferior vena cava is right here, and basically it's going to be coming in to the right atrium of the heart. Now, when we look at the inferior vena cava, let me kind of zoom into it. Come here. We can work our way down the branches. That first branch is the hepatic vein. And the interesting thing about the hepatic vein is that the hepatic vein makes a portal system. And what a portal system is it's when we have a capillary bed that goes to, basically the artery goes to a capillary bed, which is normal. And then that capillary bed goes to a vein, which is normal. The thing that makes it a portal system is when it goes to another capillary bed and then to a vein. The reason we have this setup in the case of the hepatic portal system is basically that first capillary bed is where the things come out of the bloodstream and go into the liver. And in the second capillary bed, that's where substances kind of re-enter the bloodstream from the liver. And this allows the liver to be that basically the detoxifying organ that it's known for being. Essentially, it's able to take a lot of things out of the blood by using this method. Okay. So that's the hepatic. Now, if we keep going, and one thing I'm going to do, just to do a favor for myself, is I'm going to get rid of the vertebrae here. Know that they're there. Whoa. But sometimes life is just a little bit easier when we don't have to see them. All right. Now, as we go on further, you may already be looking at this guy here, and hopefully you know that that's the azygous system that we talked about in the thoracic video. That drains the structures of the external thoracic cavity. Okay, continuing on down, our next branches of this inferior vena cava come out almost at the same level. Basically, we have the renal veins here and here. Oop. There we go. This guy right up here, I'm trying to select it, but you can see that there's this little branch that comes directly off the inferior vena cava, that's the suprarenal artery. Suprarenal means above the kidney. That goes to the adrenal gland. Okay, so this is a little bit of a change from what we saw in the arteries, where the adrenal gland or the adrenal artery came off of the renal artery. Here it comes directly off of the vena cava. All right. Also coming off of this renal artery, you have the inferior phrenic. Now remember, inferior phrenic, when we were looking at the arteries, was its own branch off of the aorta. It did not come off of the renal. So again, that's another sort of eccentricity of the venous system. I think part of that is because we have the azygous system. And since you have that azygous system, everything's just wired a little bit differently in the thorax. All right, this guy, while you'd think it would be the celiac trunk, it's actually not. This sort of set, you'll notice that the trunky, what would be the trunk, should be here. It is not there. And then you're going to say, well, Cindy, where is it? Like, where is it connected? Where is this coming off of that inferior vena cava? So one of the interesting things about the veins of the abdomen really relates to this portal system idea. So think of the portal system like the filter. And if you think about most of what's in your lower abdomen, it's a lot of the digestive organs. So those are getting nutrients and potentially some bad things out of the environment. And what we want to do is filter the bad stuff before we run it through the rest of your system. So if we look at the way that your venous system is set up, it's actually set up to run everything through your liver so that your liver will filter out all the gnarly things. Your kidneys are their own filtering organs, so they do get a direct path to the vena cava on their own, but just about everybody else runs through here. So this is the hepatic portal vein. Coming off the hepatic portal vein, we've got the splenic, and this branch off the splenic here is the inferior mesenteric. That inferior mesenteric is going to drain everything that connects to those the lower regions of the intestine. And you may have remembered earlier, I mentioned that the third branch of what looks sort of like it should be an analog to the celiac trunk is the superior mesenteric. So that's going to drain everything sort of on the north end of the intestines. Now, these are basically draining the blood that has gotten the nutrients out of those intestines because it may have gotten some toxins too. And we want to take that stuff and run it through the liver where the liver can detoxify it. So also attached to this hepatic portal vein, you have this right gastric. And actually, if we go right here, left gastric, yes, it does make a loop. This is left, this is right. These drain the blood of the stomach. You have cystic, this drains the blood out of the gallbladder. And then this is pancreatic duodenal, this drains the pancreas. So basically, all of those digestive organs are getting drained, and all of the blood from those varying digestive organs is headed into this portal system so that it can filter that blood through the liver. And once that blood gets filtered through the liver, I'm going to have to actually get rid of a couple structures here. It's going to go back through these hepatic veins. So I'm going to actually draw on this guy. And you can imagine there's blood coming from down here. It's going to go through something like this superior mesenteric. And that's going to take it through this like hepatic portal. it's going to go through the liver and then come into the vena cava via this hepatic vein. So basically you have this system where you've got the blood moving into the liver to be filtered and then moving from the liver into that inferior vena cava.